Well, you probably thought that it couldn't get any worse for Manchester United. Well, that's where this whole thing gets really fun because it always finds a way to get worse. You see, apparently, the pendulum of sports, the way it works in the United States, where it generally swings back and forth between you're very successful and you're very not, it applies to Manchester United too. It usually doesn't apply to football because you can have some clubs that are huge and some clubs that obviously aren't. And that's just the way that things are because of infrastructure and funding and fandom and whatever. Manchester United apparently is going to be forced to pay for the amount of dominance that it was able to have over how long was Sir Alex Ferguson the coach, right? Like they are being made to pay for the dominance that they had and the preeminent reputation they had as maybe the biggest club in the world, right? It was always them and Real Madrid. And that payment there just doesn't seem to be a floor on it. That's been the most remarkable thing. Now we're talking about staffing cuts and stuff Sir Jim Ratcliffe did. That's what this video is about, and a whole bunch of it's worse than you probably think, and it's a reason that I also hate FFP. But seriously, there just isn't a floor to this. It keeps getting worse for Manchester United. Now, I'm not somebody that grew up having to deal with really annoying Manchester United fans that were always winning everything, but I imagine if you did grow up in that environment, maybe you grew up an Arsenal fan, you grew up a Crystal Palace fan, hell, you grew up whatever. You were probably always having to deal with Manchester United fans winning everything, and this is cathartic. This is the type of experience that's restoring your faith in humanity. But it is quite remarkable how far this fall has gone. Now, Sir Jim Ratcliffe obviously has made no mistake about cutting people. He's fired lunch ladies. He cut 250 staff. He had a conversation with Sir Alex Ferguson to let him go. And he basically said the club would have been, on the rocks by Christmas if he hadn't taken over and started making all of these massive cuts. Well, if losing the Europa League final to Tottenham wasn't bad enough, Sir Jim Ratcliffe has, well, now I don't know if he's announced, right, but the Telegraph is reporting that 200 job cuts have been accelerated after the Europa League loss because they need to cut 200 more jobs. And we're not cutting lunch ladies anymore. You might be wondering how many people work at Manchester United because we're now looking at 450 jobs cut from Manchester United as a whole. But they're cutting actual football staff now. They're conducting a restructuring of their scouting department that includes relieving one of the lead scout, United's director of scouting, Steve Brown. Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend, right, that Steve Brown has done an unbelievable job. Okay, I don't know the guy from Adam, but it's not like their transfer strategy has been brilliant, and I would imagine the director of scouting is a part of that. But they're discussing releasing scouts, analysts, and people on the commercial side of the business, right? This is it is a massive overhaul of the way that the entire club is running. And obviously, this is the same sort of idea of anybody that comes into a business and tries to strip it for the most important parts. It's not like you're going to be able to improve performance by removing 450 people, because there are multiple impacts to this. One of the biggest ones being this club is depressed. I'm talking about mentally. This club is full of people that are afraid for their job, full of people that have no optimism. I mean, even the players, some of them feel like they don't want to be there. There is a serious lack of motivation, optimism, belief within the entire club. This is something that often gets discounted. But I'm sure at a place like Real Madrid, there is incredible continuity and a strong understanding within the staff, even the kit man, right, that creates a winning atmosphere, a championship type atmosphere. That sort of thing exists at Barcelona. It clearly has existed in the past 10 years at Liverpool, right? It exists at places like Bayern Munich, places that Manchester United used to hold a candle to, and now it doesn't anymore. And that's what I think is overlooked with this. I said for Manchester United that if they wanted to actually turn this around, they have to start winning the PR war. I mean, we'll turn this into the Vietnam War for a second. You got to win the hearts and minds. All right. And Manchester United is losing all of the hearts and all of the minds. The mood of the staff has been described as being on the floor for much of the past year as they sweat over their own futures and watch friends and colleagues depart. The anger and resentment towards the club's ownership among the rank and file was this story's crazy, by the way, very much evident at a staff screening of the Europa League final in the Manchester City Centre on Wednesday. When Ratcliffe and fellow co-owner Avram Glazer appeared on the screen at the event, a warehouse venue where they were hosting it, boos rang out among the crowd of employees and their families. If your picture goes up on the screen in front of your employees and their families, and you're getting showered with boos, I don't care how tactically brilliant your cuts are, that's not good enough. I'm sorry, but if we're talking about winning a PR competition here, I'd rather saddle up and sell a player or two to try and balance the deficit instead of firing another 200 staff right after this. Because who do I think is more responsible for the defeat? The one or two players that I'm going to go try to sell. Now, obviously, you can't sell all of the players on the team. Or the 200 staff. I have been defending. I want to be clear. I have been defending Sir Jim Ratcliffe far longer than most people have. Because I do think that fans often have pretty unrealistic expectations for what an owner should do, right? I'm the type of person that doesn't really have an issue with Daniel Levy because there shouldn't be a problem with the money you bring in is the money that you spend at a club, and that's just kind of how it works. Now, granted, Daniel Levy doesn't always spend it super well, but he does keep strict budgets, right? And he's not pulling a Glazer where he's kind of extracting money from the club, where he's paying off a loan to buy the club with the money the club is making. Right? It's just, I think it's unreasonable necessarily to ask owners to basically take a loss in order to fund the success of your club. And I also think it makes sense that if you're in a situation where you have large immovable assets and you're in danger of not reaching FFP, and you're a club like Manchester United that I'm sure, because of how big it was for so long, had some bloat in the staff, wasn't particularly streamlined, that it can be a good decision to go and make those cuts, to go and get rid of a few people and do this and do that. Now, I think they went a little too far in some of those positions, but once you start removing significant numbers of people that are involved in the football side of the operations, I just don't see how that's ever going to produce a good result. We are now taking losses, right? If you're making a move like that, you're now agreeing to losses that are directly going to impact your ability to create a team that performs on the field. Not even indirectly, directly. Right? And there is value in the team that you can move. But it's a difficult situation because Sir Jim Ratcliffe probably has to do something. He can't sit there and do nothing because the way FFP works, this is where this gets tricky, and this is why I defended him longer than most people, even though I think that this is just a ridiculously dumb PR move. If there was any morale left in the club or any optimism, it's been murdered by the fact that you've fired 200 more employees. Nobody's happy to be working there anymore. Nobody's having a good time, right? There is no energy, any positive energy. It's like when you're working at a company that you know is going bust and you're actively floating your resume to other jobs because you're just thinking it's a matter of time. That's the mood I would imagine is going on there. But what makes this situation particularly difficult is this is, at least in England, the first time that we're seeing a club that is supposed to be a perennial Champions League team fading out of that rather quickly. Fading out of that in an era of FFP where you can only spend what you make. But the problem is you have to guarantee what you're spending multiple years in the future. Those are called contracts, right? You guarantee what you're spending multiple years into the future, but you don't know what you're making. And if you underperform and if your spending projections account for the fact that you're going to be in the Champions League, then you might be fucked if you're not, because your spending projections say that you should be in that particular position. You can understand the issue. And that's another article. This is a great one from the Times. Breaks down what I'm talking about way better than I ever would be able to, right? Now, qualification for the Champions League would have made them $70 million. That's a really significant player purchase or sale right there. If they had made the Champions League, that's what that would have done to their budget. So now they're budgeting without that $70 million being in the budget, but that's not it. Right? They had $30 million in the Europa League this past season. That's gone. They're not in Europe at all. So they're losing out on that money. Also, because lawyers are very good at working out these contracts, Manchester United has to pay a £10 million penalty clause to Adidas, their kit manufacturer, because they're not in the Champions League. Who agreed to that? That's some dumb shit. But apparently, every year they're not in the Champions League, they have to pay a £10 million penalty clause, which means the net cost of them missing out on the Champions League is now $80 million. They only get 22.4 million, pounds. They also lose out on 22.4 million pounds in prize and TV money because of their league position finish. I mean, these are huge swings. I mean, that's a swing of over 100 million that maybe you're assuming is going to come in, but now all of a sudden it's not. Right? And you have to account for that in the budget in this era of FFP. I mean, we're talking about, based off this one bad season, they're missing out on over 100 million pounds in the budget. And that's before you factor in they're not going to play as many home games. You're going to miss out on home match revenue from very important European nights. You're going to miss out on other sponsorship opportunities. You're not going to get as many commercial opportunities because you're not as a big, everything funnels, everything's rolling uphill the further you go down the table. And that all hits the bottom line. And if you remember FFP, you have to basically be within, I'd say, 10 million pounds of break even on your spend, which means all these teams are doing crazy accounting, especially in the Premier League where things can swing so dramatically year to year, right? I mean, Real Madrid, what's the worst case scenario that's really going to hit for them, right? But somebody like, let's say Chelsea, if they popped up in 12th next year, I don't think anybody would be overly stunned. I mean, that'd be a big surprise, but hey, maybe it just melts down. Cole Palmer gets hurt. I don't know. Right? It would have sounded crazy to say Tottenham was going to be in 17th at the beginning of the year, but fucking here they are. But they don't have this giant black hole in their budget sheet because they're in the Champions League next year. Right? And that's a huge budgetary boost for them. Also something that, boosts the mood of the club, which Manchester United could seriously use. So I am not envious of the people that are in charge of clubs that are having to figure out how to deal with these massive swings, especially when you're taking over a club that's registered a loss of 300 million pounds over the past 3-year period and is projected, I believe I saw in here somewhere, to lose like 40 million pounds in the final quarter of this year. Manchester United is in an Everton situation, if you believe Sir Jim Ratcliffe at all. And the Everton situation is basically, you got to hunker down and survive with what you got because there just isn't really a huge opportunity to get reinforcements. Although, Manchester United has assets that Everton doesn't have. If they want to sell Garnacho, if they want to sell Kobe Mainu, not that they would fetch the price that maybe they would have at one point. Right? If you want to sell one or two other guys, maybe you've got some people in the academy that you trust, maybe you can loan somebody in, swallow your pride a little bit. Then maybe you'll be able to go out and make a transfer, pay down on your debt, or keep some of the lunch ladies. Right? But just because I'm not jealous of the fact that they have to deal with this doesn't mean that Jim Ratcliffe now isn't doing a bad job. Because even if it is absolutely necessary for Manchester United to come up with some money, at a certain point, somebody's got to sell a fucking player. All right? I know we're streamlining the club here, but the wage structure of a club like Manchester United cannot survive in the FFP era in the position that it's finishing in. And Jim Ratcliffe's solution to everything seems to just be reduce the staff, but eventually there's going to be nobody left. And Manchester United, I'm assuming at some point, is going to want to win again. But I don't see how that's going to happen if you just keep going down this road and you don't adjust the structure that is really contributing to this, which is you're paying Champions League wages to a 16th place team.